So welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar about the report and research on the learnings from the 2024 disturbances, insights from youth justice services. So this piece of research, so what we will be doing today will be a brief discussion of presentation of the findings by myself. I am Adela, the lead researcher on this project and senior researcher at the YJB. And with me today, there are three fantastic colleagues from Youth Justice Services across the north of England. There's Kay Darg, Head of Partnerships from South Tees, Louise Hampson from Youth Justice Service Manager from Hull, and Tom Lang, Head of Service from Manchester. They'll have the opportunity to introduce themselves later in this session, as we will have a panel discussion before we open Q&A to all of us. The Q&A function is open to all of us, so do put your questions in there. You'll see the little logo at the top. Please feel free to put your questions as and when they come to you, and we will go over them and bring them back and discuss at the last part of this webinar. So the disturbances that we're referring here were the ones that happened last summer and began in Southport after the murder of 3 little girls and spread across the country. Events unfolded under intense media attention, political scrutiny, and rapid judicial processes, all compounded by misinformation that was spreading really quickly online about the attacker. Articles like this were frequent, but also about the community that were brought together in the aftermath. And there's also an article, for example, like this one, where The Guardian interviewed Keith Fraser, the chair of the YJB, about the need to for an alternative approach for children during those disturbances. So there was quite an intense media attention and political scrutiny, as I said, and quite unique circumstances to operate under. We understand that these pictures may not necessarily have or be an accurate reflection of how children were involved in the disturbances, and they're not very child first, but they were an important element, and it's important to remind ourselves of this context. It is, 1 year and a half ago that this actually happened. So why did we do this? What did we actually do? So we were trying to explore how services operated under this context, under these very extreme and unique circumstances, describe their experiences and any type of learning that was type of learning, really. The way we did it is when we surveyed 28 youth justice services and interviewed 10 service leads to understand what worked, what didn't work, and what could be improved to better prepare for future events. Most participating services were in the north of England, as that's where children were involved. Other areas also experienced disturbances, but didn't have children involved. So London, for example, is one of these areas that experienced disturbances, but there were no children involved, or Wales. So that's why most of the participant services, these 28 services that had to support at least one child, were mostly located in the north of England. So it is important to caveat that and to take that into account when we are listening and applying these findings into our own context and our own regional, and apply our own regional knowledge to what for relevance and generality. Brilliant. So one of the main areas, obviously, that we looked at was impact. So, and regardless of the region or the number of children that needed support, all YJSs reported some level of disruption. The common themes were, operational strain for services due to the increased workloads, some office closures, reduced time for assessments. Staff well-being also came out as an important element that managers needed to juggle. And it also emerged that community tensions and the impact on the children and families were on practitioners' minds. The media intrusion posed a significant pressure on children and impacted on their well-being, particularly as consistent with other pieces of research. Many children were not known to use justice services, and they had additional needs. So this quote, for example, really exemplifies this. So this head of service said in an interview, people found out who the children were, and they said that the media were knocking on doors and turning up, and people were talking about them from the communities and stuff. It was a pressure on the children that was quite horrendous. This was one of the reasons one kid spiraled and ended up in care. It's a good outcome in the end because we were able to work with him and resettle him, but he struggled a lot. So this really exemplifies how the impact was not only just on the service itself, but really filtered through many elements of the community, the children, etc. Despite pressures, YGSs showed resilience and professionalism. Leadership teams acted swiftly, collaborating with police and courts to secure child-appropriate outcomes. A strong partnership working was a critical element to achieve this. Again, it was raised how most children involved in the disturbances were not known to YJSs and not ideologically motivated. So that's something interesting to take into account as well. Here's another quote about how this particular service prepared to face the challenges. So most of our caseload is diversionary, so we have very few staff trained in conducting pre-sentencing reports. So we provided training to staff on this in case we received a high number of children who needed it. So providing training, for example, was one of the ways that some services prepared. So indeed, most of the survey respondents agree with you that partnership working is a key element to prepare for future disturbances. Interestingly, you talk about contingency planning and strategic leadership. Media engagement is number 4. That is something that did not come up as quite highly. It did come up, but the having suitable interventions and training for staff was a bit higher for people in the that responded to the survey. In terms of training for staff, this is quite a vague answer because it could be for training on what, training which staff. Are we talking about leadership? Are we talking for practitioners, etc.? This came up in the research, and the responses were quite varied in the qualitative work. So around cultural competence training came up as one of the results of the disturbances. Compassionate leadership came out as well, but also as writing PSR reports and something a bit more technical and practical was also implemented in some services. Interesting, very good. So what next? We asked as well about some feedback for the YJB, for some food for thought for us to take forward, and we got quite a bit of mixed feedback. People valued oversight, but there was quite a strong call for clearer guidance and advocacy, particularly around child support. I think we've missed Sorry. I think we've missed a very important slide now talking about it. And so I hope you don't mind going forward, just because this is quite important, and we're going to talk about it in the panel. I don't know why. Must have clicked really strong on that little arrow of mine. So obviously before we move on to the what next and looking forward to it, just like to reflect on a couple of things about the challenges that services faced. Because we talked about how difficult the context was, but in terms of what actually meant for services, um, services reported significant challenges in identifying children that could be vulnerable to becoming involved in the disturbances, mostly because, as said earlier, many of the children were not previously known to YJSs. However, they were known to other services like camps, early years, etc. So there's a question there about our partnership working again. And then also that factor about not knowing that that's going to happen in your city and events unfolding very, very quickly for any type of early intervention. So that was also a challenge. Also, operating under intense media scrutiny placed additional pressure on children, families, and staff, increasing stigma and complicating efforts to provide safe and supportive engagement during and after the disturbances. The research also finds that rapid judicial processes and inconsistent decision-making across agencies reduced opportunities for diversion and made it really hard to apply the child first evidence base consistently. So we know that there's some areas that worked really well, some others really struggled to advocate for that child first approach and for the application of the child first framework. Yeah, so going back again on what next. So we do commit, in light of those challenges, the YGB commits to champion the evidence and consistent application of Child First Framework, strengthen strategic partnerships, develop case studies, review the case management guidance, and support media engagement and public messaging. There's also some lessons for the sector that I think align quite well with what you've mentioned in that latest Slido, in which, we suggest the sector to think about contingency plans and prevention, strengthen partnership working, invest in reflective practice, and share learning and good practice. So please do, if you have practice and whatnot, there will be an email at the end, an email address that you can get in contact. If you work in a youth justice service, you know who your oversight managers are. So do get in touch if you'd like to share a piece of practice, any type of training or intervention that you may have developed that could be helpful in this space. So that's the end of my presentation, very conscious of time. So we would run through the panel discussion with our three excellent panelists, and I'll stop sharing my screen. But yeah, will be our first question. From your perspective, what was the most effective response your service implemented during the disturbances? I don't know who would like to kick us off. Tom?
I'm happy to start, yeah. So yeah, the most effective response from Manchester, I have to say the quality of the interventions whilst the children were made subject to intensive bail support, and it allowed us the opportunity to identify unmet needs and build upon the children's already considerable strengths. Again, the high quality of our pre-sentence reports and the assessments, our assessments identified that the children didn't have racist or anti-immigration beliefs. They were caught. They had unmet needs, and they were caught up in driven by impulse and peer pressure. But the quality of those PSRs allowed us to explain to the court with legitimacy why they are seeing the presenting behaviours before them, and also allowed us to explain what the partnership now around these children, because they weren't known to
Mm,
services, what the partnership are now are planning to do in order to meet those assessed unmet needs and keep the children in the community and within their families. Another effective response to highlight was group work. We had a small
mm,
number in Manchester, and we delivered a group work package, which was really about exploring identity and the children's perceptions of themselves and the world around them, and um, included in that group work was taking a restorative approach. So a group of my
mm.
staff went out to a school of children who were affected who were affected emotionally by the disturbances, that ripple effect. They weren't directly involved in them, but the feelings of racism and Islamophobia especially
Lovely.
really impacting on it. And he got to engage in a group work session with a school and design a session for the children who were involved in the disturbances and that was then delivered to the children, who then took it upon themselves to write a letter back to those children who were
Nice.
affected,
Yeah.
explaining what they've learned and understood through the process
Mm.
of intervention, and that how their understanding of the wider impact the disturbances has had on them. Yeah, so that was our effective response.
Thank you, Tom. You have quite, you said you had a quite a small number. I think that's the complete opposite of Kay here. Would you like to share what worked for you?
Yeah. So we where to start really. So we didn't know what we were coming into, I guess, on the Monday after the disturbances had taken place in our town particularly. And we kind of thought we were walking into something, the volume of children, but that
Yeah.
didn't actually turn out to be the case. I believe when we came in, I think there was 3 children held in the cells, and we were expecting vast numbers, kind of,
Mm.
looking at the media narrative that was around at that time. I think one of the things that worked particularly well for us was that those early discussions that we had with the police. And I think based upon the relationships that we had with our local police force, we were able to have those very quick discussions with the police, um, and be really clear about our child first approach and the need to have a very different approach to that of adults. And we were seeing some very, very quick judicial processes for the adults, and we certainly didn't want that for our children. We wanted that kind of fair and balanced approach. So certainly those early discussions with police, I would say, was, absolutely one of the things we were able to divert, or certainly shape their thinking around that. And thankfully for us, our police force were very receptive to listening to that and continue to engage in that discussion with us. I think further down the line, another thing that worked really well for us was that early engagement with the Victim Care and Advice Service,
Hmm.
sorry. We did some worked alongside our VCAS service really closely right from the beginning, and that's been really impactful for the victims in our local community, where kind of those joint visits have taken place. That's kind of served really in many ways, but really around offering that assurance to victims, that the children that were involved in this didn't have any hatred. There was no racial motivation, there was no ideology. It was
Yeah.
absolutely not the case. And the majority of the children who were open to us, as a result of this, or just, didn't understand the consequences, and were quite shocked by how the victims had, you know, understood this to happen. So
Mm.
that was a great piece of work, and that continues to go on. It's been letters of apology, and we've had one particular child that's had a letter that was written to the community that's been used. He's given his consent for that to be used in a variety of ways. We've just used it in a recent hate crime conference, for argument's sake, just to kind of reassure the community. So there's been a number of things. So I think for us, kind of in the very early beginning, it was those early conversations with police to reshape thinking, and then later down the line around the victim services as well.
Very interesting. Louise, do you want to come in with what worked well in Hull? Because also quite a different story, isn't it?
And I suppose it is a different story in terms of I'm not in Manchester with my colleague Tom, and I'm not up north in Newcastle with Kate, but there are so many similarities. And I
Absolutely.
think for us, when we think about what was effective for us, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I'm on the back with Kate of that relationship with the police and getting in there very quickly and very early in terms of really keeping the child first principles at the forefront of thinking. I have to be honest and say that wasn't always easy. That was the challenge. And the challenge was keeping us child first, child focused, but that was the most effective thing we could do from the outset. And then what we developed very, very early on is kind of that restorative approach and restorative approach with organisations that had been victimised by this disturbance in Hull. So we worked really hard to kind of get that voice of the child out there and understanding the thinking that was going on for children involved in the disturbances, because it wasn't about that racist ideology, as Kate and Tom has already said.
Yeah.
It was children acting spontaneously, risk taking, excitement, going to have a nosy basically, and before you know it, they're involved in really serious disturbances. I think to just pick something up a little bit different from Tom and Kay, in Hull, what we did was we very quickly established that we might find ourselves in a position where children were getting a duplication of consequences. And so we very quickly mobilised with secondary schools to build relationship with secondary schools where children had been implicated or already dealt with. And we worked hard to try and build those connections between youth justice and schools to offer some reassurance to schools that we was dealing with addressing behaviour, because we worried that potentially it could have been kind of doubling down on consequences. And for us in Hull, we was absolutely concerned about keeping children in school and keeping children safe. So for us, that mobilisation of pulling all schools together that might have a child that's been implicated, who might want to engage with us, offering contact names, links, points of contact in the service to build trust, to spread the word of the work that Youth Justice does in terms of diversionary activities was something that we found worked well in that first instance, Adela.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Louise. I think you kind of alluded to my next question about the challenges and overcoming them around this challenge of advocating for child first. But is there anything else you'd like to add to that, or another difficulty that you may have encountered and overcame?
I think it was for us in Hull, and I suppose I think we're probably all going to say the same thing. It was about the swiftness of the process.
Yeah.
And at first, that was a real challenge to try and slow thinking down a little bit and try to give us as a partnership an approach which was child first. And I think that's where it was just really interesting to see on the Pearl partnership came out, because for me, that's what's going to help us in the future and get the best outcome for children. And that's that partnership approach, and then connections that we have with our colleagues in the police service, in education, in early help children's services. It's pulling on those key relationships that you've got from the outset. So for me, the bit was about the swift justice and trying to get in there as quick as possible in terms of relationships and conversations to try and keep everybody child first focused.
Definitely. Tom, I saw you nodding there. Is there anything you'd like to add there?
Just what Louise said there is that he's always championing and advocating for children and advocating for the relationships and actually to not only maintain but increase that trust in youth justice services to deliver and keep communities and children and communities safe.
Definitely. Hey, is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so, not at this
around
point. No, thank you.
challenges?
I
Around
suppose
challenges. I suppose one of the things was, I guess, not knowing
Mm,
what we were coming into the day after the riots. I suppose, I'd watched on the TV the same as everybody else,
yeah,
all the narrative around the negative narrative around the young people that had been involved, and just expected, to be coming into serious amount of volume that morning, and that wasn't the case really. And then I think also internally sort of pressures from people wanting to know and understand what was happening for children from the wider partnership, when we really didn't know ourselves at that point. So
yeah,
the pressure from, chief exec, the mayor, directors, people, who were, what's happened to these children, were they known to us, what's the risks to the town, what's, wanting us to input into those conversations. And we didn't know at that particular point. And I guess it on the back of what Louise was saying, it's that everything happened all at once and we needed to slow things down just to understand for ourselves what the impact was going to be.
indeed.
and just to add to that as well, that
Yeah.
it can't go under the intense media pressure which was put upon the families. It was a real challenge for the partnership to support families when you're on a home visit and you've got the media knocking on doors. And I don't it was not something we regular experience as a partnership working with children. And it was intense, and really had a negative impact upon their emotional well-being.
Yeah, definitely. I think that came out again and again in the research um, about the media and social media as well. The children being identified, uh, etc., and working in schools, as you mentioned, Louise, earlier, how important that could be and impactful for those children, as their classmates and the teachers, etc., knew who they were. So very, very interesting work. So in terms of looking ahead, then, just thinking of, is there anything that you are implementing? Are there any plans in place to strengthen um, preparedness in if similar events were to happen again? Have I think you alluded to a little bit to this, Kay, about your victim work and how, working with communities. Is there?
I mean, there's learning to take from that in terms of,
Mhm.
the victim there was individual victims, of course, but it was the kind of the community, particularly it was the entire town, but there was one particular area of the town where
Mm,
that victim work took place very early on and provided some assurance. So I suppose that approach worked really well to kind of go in early. Trying to think what else. There was something else, but it'll come back to me. Sorry, Adela, it'll come back.
it's okay. I'm just conscious of time as well. Now that I have you on screen, is there anything um that any call of action for the rest of us, for the YJB and the wider sector, about how we could better support you in applying Child First, and um, when things like this happen?
Oh, I'll tell you what was effective as a response, but would be effective as a preventative
Yeah,
aspect of a city or town's runs. Detached youth work, we following the disturbances, our community
yeah,
safety partnership commission detached youth work,
hmm,
and it's just a reminder of the value of youth workers working within communities, and how the impact that has to prevent children coming to our attention. And
hmm,
And again, he was reactionary, but bringing people from different backgrounds together, adults and children, to share their experiences, and again putting creative sessions on in the communities which were affected by the disturbances for both children and adults was great in response. But it's also made us realise how important these factors are, or these interventions are, for prevention in the future. And that's how you truly listen to your community, as Kay said. You listen to your community by having the right services and support and mechanisms for engagement within those communities.
I think that's a great call of action. Louise, would you like to add anything else there? And then we'll go to Q&A.
I think the overwhelming kind of perspective that I've been left with is about the child first partnership working, is kind of just how it feels like we need to continue to bolster, strengthen at any opportunity we advocate and we spread the word. And I think that that's what enabled us to move quickly in the first instance. For me, it is more of that, and it's more opportunities to be able to express that child first approach, Adela. I think that's what the overwhelming sense is that I've been left with after this.
Excellent. Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Tom and Kay. We'll move on to the Q&A now. So feel free to add your questions to the Q&A section of the top bit of your screen. Jenny, have you seen any questions?
Yeah, we have got one question already, and I think that speaks to actually Tom's point about that kind of community cohesion work as well. This is a question about staff, and there was quite a lot in the research, wasn't there, about the impact on staff. So this question is, how did you protect global majority staff in the aftermath? And I know some of that came out in some of the findings. So does anybody want to pick up on that point about protecting staff who may be particularly affected by the nature of the disturbances?
Yeah, I can come in on that one for briefly. It's having a culture. I think having a culture within the management team of compassionate leaders, actually taking the time to understand how global majority staff were impacted upon this, and how and what mechanisms we can put in place to best support them. And what the most effective intervention and support was for staff was giving them time. This is anyone from our cleaners to our business support to our ISS delivery staff. This was a new experience for them, and that compassionate leadership and management style was just enabling safe spaces and time to listen and understand, because you don't necessarily trying to solve all the problems, but actually being compassionate and listening to. And in addition to that, what we did put on as well is clinical supervision by trained therapists, and that was open for anybody to. It always is open for anybody to go and get support, but in particularly, it was picked up in response to the disturbances and how that impacted upon all our staff, not just the practitioners.
And I think I would say exactly the same as what Tom's just said. It was around, knowing your staff really well, but being compassionate leaders and understanding and listening to the concerns that were being raised to us. Some people were kind of saying, I've never seen racism like this, I've never experienced this before. So it was kind of just listening to those concerns and having the support mechanisms available to them, for us and across the partnership, but also those clinical supervision arrangements we've got in place too, if staff require them.
I don't want to repeat and echo what people have said, but it's exactly the same for us. And our staff are part of our local communities too. Us and our staff are those local communities. And so it's about making sure that support is on offer and carefully listening and picking up and learning where we can as we go, as many of these experiences were new to us and to staff. So it was a real opportunity to listen as much as ensuring support was there and staff had that time. I mean, it feels really obvious thing to say, giving people time and compassion because we do it day in, day out. But it's absolutely right to underline that and make sure that when we need to, we absolutely deliver for our staff.
Brilliant.
We haven't got any more questions in the comments yet, so I'll come on in with one if that's all right, Adela.
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously we've talked a lot about partnerships and how important, and that's come out really strong in the research, hasn't it? Really strongly in what you've said, and also in the Slido as well. I'm just wondering how those partnerships have evolved after the disturbances, whether there's been any new collaborations, whether they've kind of taken a new direction following the disturbances, and how that's going subsequently.
I think I'm happy to jump straight in there and say, certainly in Hull, we very quickly manoeuvred to lessons learned as a partnership and reflections. We took that as a theme in one of our management boards, and then we took that wider with the wider partnership and did lots of work around reflective thinking. And if we had the opportunity to do things differently, how would we do that going forward? And that was a really productive and useful session. And in terms of how it's evolved since that point, I hope this doesn't sound very much like a cliche, but I feel like it's made us stronger and we learned together. So it felt like we was able to have really honest and open conversations, and that's just developed and made us kind of a stronger partnership with those routes to communication straight off the bat if we was to see this again. I do feel I get a real sense of that, Adela.
That's great.
I'd repeat that. I'd say the partnership working in youth justice services is what we do, you know. But and I agree with what Louise said there, is that what this has done is just further strengthen those partnerships, and especially with our police and community safety colleagues, because it really, this experience for me and in youth justice, it really give senior managers across different services real insight into the work we do in youth justice. And like interventions work, you know what I mean? Interventions work. If you complete an intervention, then you're 3 times more likely not to reoffend in Manchester. So it's actually given a tangible story to say, you know, keep these kids in the community. You know, I was really pleased that none of our children went to custody for the violent disorders. So again, like I said, it was just about actually things getting stronger rather than new partnerships.
Yeah, I would agree completely, and I think it's shown that, you know, the power of partnership working actually works and can achieve some really good outcomes for our children. I think the majority, we didn't have any children go to custody specifically around the disorder offences, and we've been able to have some great outcomes for some of these children as well. Gone into education, training, jobs, other things that, you know, have really gone on to have some good outcomes. And I think that's a learning point in itself, isn't it? You know, it's changing the narrative, it's shone a light on the work that can be achieved.
Interesting. I think we have a question around sentencing outcomes, and which you all have lightly touched on that, and that most of you were able to kind of pursue those diversionary approaches and have some success stories there. Mostly thanks to good relationship working with police and other partners. Is that right?
Yeah, do you want me to come in on that? So in terms of outcomes, I thought this question might come up today. So we've had mainly referral orders because of the levels of violence that were what I would say is that the outcomes that we've had have felt proportionate in response to the children's levels of involvement. around it. So we've had some children, four, that gone on to get referral orders. We've had a couple of youth rehabilitation orders, and then the rest have kind of been diverted off outcome 22, community resolutions and things like that. So we've had a kind of a real spread, really, of outcomes for our children.
Thanks, Kay.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say in Hull, we had a fair amount of children involved in the disturbances, really sadly. And I think reflecting back in the early days with the swift decision making, we had less diversionary outcomes than we would have liked. But by the time we was able to really pull that partnership together and going as quickly as we possibly could, we then really started to have an impact on diverting children away from statutory outcomes, which was really welcomed and felt like we was able to have an impact. But I think it is fair to say in those very early days, children were going to court very quickly, and we was not having the impact that we would have liked to have had, although we did get there.
Fantastic, thank you, Louise. Tom, would you like to come in there? I know you had a very small number of children, but that's also very interesting to hear.
Yeah, there's a small number of children. The impact for us was that they didn't get remanded because we advocated for them in court, and put the right packages in place to gain the confidence of the courts that we can manage these children in the communities. And like Kay said, ours got referral orders, which was proportionate to the gravity of the offences they committed. And they go back to the last time we had disturbances, a decade ago. Lots of children went to custody for lesser gravity offences than these. All the children completed, and none of the children have come back.
Yeah, that's great. I have just conscious of time, just to have a couple more questions, if that's all right. One for you and another for another YJB colleague, and we'll finish there. And mostly it's just, what advice would you give to a YJS who hasn't experienced this? How and wants to prepare for something like the disturbances? What advice would you give?
Me, it's doing what we're already doing, which is about understanding youth culture more and more. We've got to keep understanding children and the culture surrounding them, but also having them strong relationships with our communities, like detached youth work, like youth work centres, so that we can so that we know if any community sentiment or tensions which are developing. But then again, just what we do is we really celebrate diversity through education, and doing that earlier, doing that more and earlier in children's lives.
Thanks, Tom. Any more advice?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you don't know what you're preparing for, and to the scale of what you're preparing for. And I guess, like Tom says, for most of us, it felt like business as usual, but sped up a little bit. Because we just kind of like, responding to what we do every day. And, for some services, like mine, we have quite a lot of children anyway with high levels of need. We don't shy away from, we've got complexity and violence in our area, etc., as I'm sure many areas do. So it didn't feel strange or odd. I guess there was kind of, we would agree with kind of the majority of the findings in this report, really, in the sense of, make sure you've got enough people that can write pre-sentence reports, have you great, strengthen your partnership relationships and arrangements that you've got, because that really was the biggest thing, those relationships that you've got, when you're trying to work at pace like that, you need those strong relationships, because if you haven't got that, then you're on the back foot to start with. You know, we've luckily in our area was able to pick up the phone to colleagues in the police and have those very early discussions, and that kind of set us off on the right path, really. So I think, you know, certainly at board level, you know, make sure you've got the right people strategically sitting around the table and bought into your partnership would be, you know, a start.
That's very interesting, because it's not only just about the technical skills, you know, how many PSR report writers you have on the ground, but also, you know, how many people are sitting around the table to have these very important conversations. That's very interesting, and yeah, definitely. Brilliant, thank you. Jordan, would you like to come in and tell us about the prevention and diversion tool? So as many of you know, the prevention and diversion tool that has been implemented and put in practice this year, and there's also some changes in Asset Plus that are aimed to potentially support YJSs to have conversations with children about views and attitudes. So it's just something that is happening in the background, and yeah, how do you think this may
Yeah,
help
I mean, I
these
can come in on this.
objectives?
I feel like a bit of a fraud because it's Tracy Green and Richard Vaughan who are leading this from the YJB side. And I'm picking this up because I'm sort of supporting the evaluation of PDAT from a research perspective. But everyone on the call from practice will know what the prevention and diversion assessment tool is. But it's essentially an assessment tool that's mandated for all diversion and out of court disposal cases and optional for prevention. I won't go into too much detail on that, but it was set out basically to try and standardize assessments for children, promote assessments that align with the Child First evidence base, and it's been developed alongside and with the sector, building on it those existing tools and good practice. It's not something that the YJB has sort of invented out of the ground. And I guess just in relation to your question, so there's a new question in PDAT which asks around how children are using the internet, how they use it. And I think this gave really for the first time within these assessments on a national level, really, a way of capturing that information about children's use of the internet. And there were also some different things within the guidance notes around what platforms children are using, and, you know, consider, you know, their use of social media as a factor for sort of assessing, you know, vulnerabilities or well-being concerns. But although the information within PDAT has been really helpful for starting those conversations, I think there's been a recognition around sort of clearing up that question and making it a bit more comprehensive. So in the next iteration of PDAT, there'll be further prompts around how a child is spending their time online, what platforms they're using, and whether this exposes them to any sort of concerning material. And that question will also be in the update of Asset Plus with some sub-questions on how a child connects with other people through social media platforms. Does the child come across anything online that makes them uncomfortable? And a question for the assessor around, do they believe that the child is at risk of radicalization or causing harm to others from their online activity? So, you know, there are these changes that are coming within PDAT. There are already some things within there that relate to trying to engage in this sort of early stage around, you know, some of these sort of concerning parts. But I will stop there and just say that we've got an evaluation of PDAT coming out in the new year, so look out for that. But I won't steal any thunder from the rest of this webinar, and I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Jordan. I think you opened another topic there, because Tom, you mentioned how, you know, listening to children and how important that is, about that youth work and listen to your communities, and that also may involve listening to what's important to them and how they're interacting digitally with each other. So that's another conversation we can have, I think, on the online world and there. But thank you. Right, so we are coming to a close. Are there any last reflections that you'd like to make, panelists?
Me,
Go for
it's
it, Tom.
just that like as a services that relentless advocating for child first principles, you know, and it's these partnerships understanding child first principles, and it just doesn't happen overnight. This is what we've been doing
Yes.
for many years, and it's just we just got to keep being relentless, because we do start to see better outcomes for children across the partnerships when we're seeing children first and looking to build upon on the considerable strengths.
I think that's a great way to finish. I don't think I would have said it any better. Yeah, child first is evidence-based, and we shall continue. Well, thank you all for joining. We will please spend a couple of minutes, a minute, sharing your thoughts on our feedback survey that I will put on screen, and you will receive an email as well. Thank you all for coming, and having a bit of you will receive also a bit of a summary of the discussion, and the presentation was recorded, or like my presentation was recorded, so you will have access to that as well if you'd like to share with partners. And yeah, I'll put an email and the survey link on the screen, and please do keep in touch if you have interventions, training, any type of practice that you have implemented in your service that you'd like to share. Please do get in touch. You can always submit a form to that for that to be shared in the resource hub. And we'll, yeah, love to hear from you. Thank you all.
Just to confirm, the link to the feedback form is also in the Q&A pinned to the top.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Cassie. Thanks. We'll leave it there for a couple of minutes, and then we'll close the meeting. But yeah, please feel free to log off and go to the rest of your work day. Pick up the kids.